reopening the panel on writing and orthography. The next speaker is Jhonnatan Rangel on writing the future of Ayapaneco and orthography for heritage and new speakers of a critically endangered language. Please.
Thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Can you see well? Okay. Yes. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So, hi everyone, and thank you for connecting. I'm gonna talk about my presentation is Writing the Future of Ayapaneco, which is an orthography for heritage speakers and new speakers of a critically endangered language. These are the main topics that I'm gonna be talking about. I'm gonna talk about a little bit of critically endangered language, about one of these languages, which is Mixe-zoque Ayapaneco, and revitalization of this language, and the orthography development process that is very recent, and then some concluded remarks. First of all, let's start by some basic ground here. What's the critically endangered language? Instead of offering a definition, let's start by the continuum of vitality according to the UNESCO, the worst language. We have, I mean, in this conference, we have talked about a lot about endangered languages in general, and also there's a continuum, and there's some different classifications according to the degree, level of vitality or endangerment. And I'm gonna focus myself on the 9% that is in red, which corresponds to critically endangered languages. And I'm gonna talk to about the other kind of endangered language, but just to this one, that is one stage before the language become dormant. So what are the characteristics? Instead of talking about definition, let's say, let's put some basic characteristics that these languages share, that is not linguistic, but no social linguistics. The first and the most important one is the intergenerational transmission of the language is usually interrupted for decades. Therefore, you just have the youngest speakers are grandparents or an older grandparents. I mean, that's the youngest speakers of these languages. Usually, it's a very small proportion of speakers in relation to a larger community. The language, therefore, is used in a very sporadic domains and reduced to usually private domains, but could be other religious domains, but very few private domains. Usually, too, this language also happen to be don't have a written tradition or literacy in the language. So those are the common characteristics of this 9% of the world language that actually are currently, there are about 577 critically endangered languages in the world. And they could disappear, they correspond to the 9% of the world's languages, and they could disappear at any time in this decade. We always say that endangered languages, they're gonna disappear, they're at risk of disappearing in this century, but in this case, we're talking about the next 5 to 10 years, maybe less than 5 due to COVID or in current situation in the world. But here we can see the distribution of these languages. It's important to say that this is not an isolated phenomena. We can see it everywhere in the world. Every red dot in this map corresponds to a critically endangered language. And I'm gonna talk about one of these red dots because I think it's interesting to get into a case study, a specific case study of what's happening in one of these red dots, which is Mixe-zoque Ayapaneco. That it's a language spoken in Mexico, in the south of Mexico, specifically nearby the Gulf of Mexico, you can see in the map, in the state of Tabasco. So this language is a critically endangered language too. It's spoken in a community or in a village about 5,500 inhabitants, and it's only spoken by approximately 8 remaining bilingual speakers. Ayapaneco first language, Spanish second language, between the ages of 70 to 90 years old. They're all matched to the characteristics of to be grandparents or great grandparents in some cases. We're talking about disconnected pocket of speakers because there are so few of them that they usually don't talk to each other in a daily life. And then we see into perspective to the community, to the entire village, it's about, they correspond to pretty much 0.2% of the total population. This language hasn't been transmitted to newer generations for over 60 years. And the language is very rarely used in the daily life of the speakers. And the speakers themselves and the rest of the remaining population interact or talk in the Spanish. Their only interactions are conducted in Spanish, including the few remaining speakers of Ayapaneco, because as I said, they're disconnected between each other. It happens to be that this language is also under-documented and under-described. That actually adds an extra layer of complexity. And it's a language, as I said, with an oral tradition, but with no previous writing system. So with these elements in mind, what happens is in 2012, the community took an initiative to actually try to revitalize the language. It was a community-based revitalization effort that it started in 2012 to try to reverse all these characteristics that are already mentioned. For that, we have some actors that were involved in this process. We have five of the elder speakers that were participating in this process since the beginning. Out of the other remaining speakers were either too sick or they have a physical disability and they couldn't participate. So we just have a few of them participating in this project. A heritage speaker that is very, I'm gonna talk more about what I mean by heritage speaker. And in general, the larger community and the researcher that it's including me in this process since 2012. So this process have different objectives that we can identify. So we can separate objectives between short-term or long-term objectives, and they correspond to different domains. So the first and the most important short-term objective, it was to encourage the emergence of new speakers. That was one of the things that the remaining speakers wanted. They wanted to have more people to talk to. So that was one of the main short-term objectives of this process. Also to produce language materials, because to support the emergence of these new speakers and the use of the language in the village. More importantly is raise awareness locally and nationally. Since this language was didn't have so many very few speakers in the country, people was not aware that this language existed, or very few people. So that was also to try to put the language in the map of Mexico or in the map of the region. Also to recover a sense of identity, because in the case of Ayapaneco, only the speakers have this sense of belonging to indigenous community, but the rest of the remaining population of the village didn't feel that they belong to an indigenous community. But this is changing, and more and more people is kind of like going to this connection with the language and identity in this specific village. And then of course, there are like the long-term objectives, like reversing language shift or rebuilding communal life in general, all the practices that they used to happen 60 years ago and now all of a sudden they don't exist anymore. So let's start by the main objective of this project, which was the emergence of new speakers. So the community decided that the best way to implement this was through an informal second language classes center on reading and writing. Of course, there are different methodologies out there, but they decided that this was the one that they wanted to go for. The learners for this, the director learners of the audience for this, there were local children aged between 6 and 12, and they grew up in a monolingual Spanish setting. Also, they were literate, most of them literate in Spanish. And the teachers were the elders that I just showed you in the other slide. With limited Spanish literacy, because they just went to school 1 or 2 years when they were young, and one young adult heritage speaker who is fully literate in Spanish. So this was the characteristics for carry on this specific objective. So right there, we just see that there's a big challenge, how to represent the Ayapanecan writing to support this emergence of new speakers and to produce language materials. As I said, they started before the process without even having a way to write the language, which is very interesting, because that tells you that the main objective was not to write the language, but actually to generate new speakers. So now, until now, flash forward to 2019, when we started a process for actually trying to solve this problem, or the lack of an orthography. So this process is still continuous. It still continues the process, but let's say that it took about 12 months. The 3 stages that I can show you right now. The first stage was to identify the users and identify the domains of use of their orthography. Who were going to be using this orthography, or what for? Then the most technical aspects was to establish the graphics and the rules for the writing the language. And finally, some testing and improvements for later versions of this orthography. So The process is initiated by the speakers and by the community, and mostly was meetings, informal and formal meetings, and with elders and heritage speakers to identify the users and the domains of uses orthography. Then we started with the development workshops with heritage speakers and learners of Ayapaneco. We did some pre-tests to identify the literacy skills of some of the students and how this transfer of literacy could help us to develop this orthography. And then the most technical aspects of the orthography, like establishing vowel consonants and everything. Finally, was the testing in use in the class, during the class, and actually right now in a documentation project that we are actually transcribing everything using the new orthography. And this whole process was supported by the Endangered Language Fund. So when we identify the user, we identify two kind of users, the immediate users and future users. So immediate users are second language learners whose first language is Spanish. So it's these children, local children that go to class, Ayapaneco class. Then the second kind of user of this orthography were heritage speakers, that actually right now there's only one heritage speaker identified in the community. And there's broad definitions for what a heritage speaker is, and it's going to be according to the context or according to the specific context. There's a broad and a very narrow definition. Let's say for the simplicity of this presentation, that there are individuals who's from a language minority group who grew up exposed to minority language at home and a majority and societal language. So that could be like roughly what a heritage speakers in this case. And so far we just have one due to personal and family history that actually allowed the emergence of these heritage speakers. So heritage speakers are fundamental in this process because they are the bridge between elder speakers and the new speakers. And the new speakers are going to be the next kind of users of this orthography. And between the language states, because Ayapaneco is going to transition from endangered to dormant, and if the revitalization process works, to a rewoken language. So the heritage speakers are this transition and part of what this language is the future of this language. So the future uses, as I said, is new speakers of Ayapaneco. The same, there's different definitions out there of what is a new speaker. Let's just say that there are individuals that learn the language in the context of language revitalization activities. So far, we don't have any. We don't have any new speaker of Ayapaneco. So this is interesting because we don't know their social and linguistic characteristics, and they have to be determined. When they're going to be the social characteristics, we don't know. We don't know what the relation to the language of these new speakers are going to be, what the relation to the community is going to be, what does the language practices they're going to have, or if they self-identify or not as new speakers of Ayapaneco. So if you see, we have two kind of users of this orthography. One of them, we know their characteristics, but the second one, we don't know. So we have to plan and kind of like work something out for of the future that we don't have all the elements. So that's what I was saying, planning for the future that we don't know with the tools that we have in the present, which was very challenging. So once we identified this, it was time to work on the domain of use. For the community, it was clear that the pedagogical materials and printed materials was the priority. So that was very straightforward. They wanted to use it for internet and social media and other domains of use. When we get that part, we get to the technical part. And the question was to choose between a shallow or deep orthography. In this case, the community preferred a shallow orthography. In a shallow orthography, there's a correspondence between orthographic representation and phonetic realization. And this has some advantages, as the case for Ayapaneco. And one of the advantages was that it's easier to learn for second language learners of Ayapaneco because they rely on phonetic realization to recognize words. As we're saying, we're talking about students that don't have any intuition of the language. And the only way to actually differentiate words is or recognize is through phonetics. Of course, there's consideration because at the end of the day, this might blur the graphic identity of morphemes, but right now it's not a problem. It could be for the future, though. Then the idea was to actually use, if we are going to use the language conventions from the dominant language, which is the Spanish, and the community preferred that because this will facilitate the transfer of literacy from Spanish to Ayapaneco. So all the children already were literate in Spanish, or most of them at least. So that would be a smooth transition to Ayapaneco with orthography. And the most important is the technical text production. We will have all the tools, WhatsApp, all the social media to actually use for Ayapaneco. If we need it, we don't have to create anything. And if we decided to not to follow these conventions, we will have to create it on, and we don't have time for that because the language is in a state that is very endangered. So that was one of the main driving forces of this. The graphemes are based on the Spanish script, therefore. So one important thing that is language variation to consider too. This orthography incorporates language variation, and this corresponds to the characteristic that is a shallow orthography. And let's say something about language variation in Ayapaneco. It's a structure around various highly complex parameters, and is part of the language of the characteristics of the language as for today. And the question was to include it or not. In a lot of orthographies, is not in other parts of the world. Sometimes the community decide not to include variation. But in our case of Ayapaneco, the question was if it was we're gonna go through a simple way. The simplicity is that means to not include any variation and choose one variant and actually stick to that variant and make it simpler, or choose the language variation and make it a little bit more complicated for students maybe. But at the same time, language variation was linked to social conflict in Ayapaneco. That means we have very few speakers, and the variation partially structure around this idiolects of each of the speaker. So we decided one variant that will leave out of the process one of the speakers, that will create conflict. So we wanted to avoid conflict. The community wanted to avoid conflict. So the best solution was to avoid it and include all the ways that the language is spoken as today. And like that, we avoid social conflict, that it was more important than actually simplicity. Another aspect is that there's no local norm regarding variation, which gives us a huge perk, because we don't have an academia of Ayapaneco that tells us that this variant is better than the other and more prestigious. So in this case, we were free to actually choose whatever we want or the community want. So here's an example of that. So here we have a phonemic representation of the word numteote, which is the name of the language in Ayapaneco, which means true voice or true speech. And here is all the way to represent the language currently. And the students or the learners can actually choose any of those forms that if they want, for representing or for writing the name of the language. As you can see, the variation is basically, it's the vowels what varies, but each one of these variations correspond to one speaker. So it was very important not to leave out any of those variants, because that would mean leave out from the process a speaker, which right now we couldn't afford it given the reduced number of them. I want to say that this is a transitional orthography too. The long-term vision is to transition to a deep orthography once the generation of new speakers develops its own language practices and intuitions. Of course, if this is necessary, because also this allows us to flexibility. If the community decides to transition to a deep or phonological orthography, it will be possible. If not, they could continue with the shallow orthography, which wouldn't be a problem. So it's a possibility, allows a possibility from shallow to deep if necessary. For doing that, of course, we have cataloging in a database all phonological representation of common words, and that will inform the development of new orthography in the future if needed. Like the example I show you with the name of the language, this is kind of like an entry phonological, and then the other will be the representation. So to conclude, as I said, 9% of the world's 6,000 plus languages are critically endangered today. And any revitalization process through second language classes and pedagogical materials, like the case of Ayapaneco, requires an orthography. That's clear. But also, we need to understand that orthography in most cases is a tool, but not an end in itself. In revitalization, end in itself. The case of Ayapaneco was clear. They started with revitalization and they didn't think about writing until recently. So you can tell that the tool, the orthography, is a tool to actually try to accomplish what they wanted to do. Also, the most important part of this process is to identify the users and domain of use, because based on that, you will make all the other decisions. Without this information, it will be very hard to make a decision. And in the case of critically endangered languages, it's very possible that they're going to be immediate and future users, and the characteristics are going to be completely different. So any transitional orthography give us this flexibility to transition between immediate and future users, and that makes it fluid and also inclusive for everyone that wants to participate. New speakers, heritage speakers, elder speakers, everyone can be included because it's a transitional one. And heritage speakers are the bridge between elder speakers and new speakers, but also they are the bridge between language states, from endangerment, dormant, and reawoken. And actually, that's the one of the perks of a transitional orthography, make it fluid to actually adapt to the new state of the language, the transition of the language. Finally, language variation in critically endangered languages follows very complex parameters and could be a source of conflict that cannot be overlooked in any orthography. So whenever you face that, you need to make a decision whether you prefer simplicity over social conflict, or see what is the most important variable in this case. And I think with that, I will conclude.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wonder if there are any questions from the audience. Thank you for the talk. So maybe while we're waiting for questions from the audience, maybe I can ask a question of my own. It's quite a naive question. So excuse me if it's too naive, but whether a transitional orthography, once it transitions into a deeper orthography, isn't there an issue that you've created materials in this transitional orthography and then that needs to be somehow shifted? It's meant to be a very naive question, so just
yeah. Well, that was I mean, the question is, as I said, in this context, you need to make a decision, and the decision is simple. I mean, sometimes we tend to think in orthography that something that it's always going to be there and it's going to be the same forever. But the fact is, like, we decided to make it fluid because the state of the language is going to be fluid. As I said, right now it's critically endangered. Tomorrow is going to be dormant, and if they continue in that path, probably there's going to be a reawaken. An orthography that is monolithic and doesn't change, just adjust to the transition of the language, of the state of the language. So the materials, regarding the materials, of course, that could be an issue, but that's what I said, that we're creating a database with all the phonological words. So we will have writing any form, whatever it is today. And then if tomorrow we decided to change, or the community decided to change, we just translate into the phonological form that actually was, we have already in our database. So that allows for flexibility.
Thank you so much. That makes it clear.
Yeah.
There is a question from Sarah Round. Would you like to ask your question, Sarah?
Oh, hi. Sorry. Yes. My question, I think, yeah, it is quite a starter question as well, just because I'm not overly familiar with the area, although it's very fascinating. It was a great presentation. I was wondering what differentiates the transitional orthography you're mentioning from one that is more static and less fluid, like the specific linguistic components that ensure that it stays fluid and transitional and allows the next generation to kind of edit it.
Yeah, well, as I said, right now, all the forms that are there, the representations of every word, everything that is because it exists right now in use, and it's according to the remaining few speakers that are there. So all the forms that are there exist because it's the speakers that use them currently. And then in the future, we don't know exactly what the characteristics of the new speakers are going to have. And that's the big question that I was asking since the beginning. So we have individuals right now that are speakers, but not the users of the orthography, because also I didn't say that, but they were not interested in using the orthography themselves because they lack literacy skills and they don't see the point of using them themselves, but they wanted the orthography for the future. So it was interesting to see that they wanted to build something for the future, not for them. So once that you put into perspective that tells you that the transition allows you precisely whoever comes and be part of this community called Ayapaneco or whatever new speaker that actually can bring in their linguistic characteristics and everything, and that would allow us to do that with a fluid orthography. Exactly, we can actually change forms, and we know the underlying form or the phonological form. That's what I'm saying. You know, like. At the moment, we know this word, so we know this phonological form. And at some point, we want to change. It will be easier to change because we have the word. Of course, that's going to be adapted to the new speakers, because if the new speakers speak certain way, have certain characteristics, I mean, the orthography will have to adapt to this new speakers. So what the point that I said is like having a monolithic orthography actually doesn't allow for inclusion of new speakers, or really like put it out of the process because they feel that they don't have quite the skills for the language skills. That happens in a lot of communities. A lot in Mexico, for instance, what is this the case? There's a lot of debates about orthography because also the elders want, no, this is the way that it should be written because that's how it's spoken. You know, like there's a lot of conflict around orthography. But if you get out of this conflictive area of orthography, that allows for everyone that can actually participate. I think that will be more or less the idea, the trying to allow the transition of language state, but also like the transition of speakers, kind of speakers.
Okay, I see. Thank you so much. It was a brilliant presentation.
Welcome.
Just looking in the chat if there's any further questions.
May I ask, hi, this is Rita. Being Finnish, yeah, this is just for entertainment value. Being Finnish, my name is spelled in a really crazy way and I get a lot of questions. They're like, oh, did you press too many times on the keyboard? And your name, as Manuel says in the chat, is also spelled in an interesting way. So can you comment on that? This is just a personal fun question.
My name, the spelling my name also like matches, I guess, with the orthography is very fluid in the sense like, and I think just my mom wanted to make it different, that even though it was the same name, like I have my own personality. I think that was the main idea behind the different spelling, just purely make it different.
It's memorable, it's great, thank you.
Yeah.
If I may, then I would like to add just one more comment, that I thought that your decision to take all the variants from the elders, for the older speakers at the moment, I think that's a really great idea, because actually learners find it easier to learn a language that has variable forms. It's sort of counterintuitive, but it's actually easier because it restricts the phonological space in a more interesting way. So I just want to say that I thought that was a great decision.
Yeah, I mean, it was not technically my decision, but it was kind of the decision they felt. I mean, as I said, the main reason for that is avoiding conflict, and also because it gives you some sort of freedom, even for the writers, even for me that I write the language. Sometimes I don't doubt myself. Oh, is it well written? Because I know, oh, maybe that's the other variant that I kind of write in. But at the end of the day, I know what the word is. So I mean, that was the whole point, to make it flexible and open for everyone that can participate and doesn't like, oh, this is the rules and you always have to write the word like it is. We were not thinking about going an academy of the language. It was just a tool, for the community.
Sure. Okay. Maybe we can. Someone's asking in the chat if I can elaborate, but maybe that's more appropriate in the chat room. So if there are no more questions in the audience, then we would like to thank our speaker one more time. Thank you, Jhonnatan.
Thank you.
And let me hand over the mic to Hayab John from the Kaduna State College of Education in Gidan Waya, who's going to talk to us about Hyamic languages of North Central Nigeria and the role of standardization of orthography for language documentation. Thank you very much, Philippe. Can we make sure that Philippe had,
Yeah, thank you for having me. All right, can you hear me? Can you see the slides?
We can hear you and we can see the slides, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this FEL conference of this year. The topic, as we can see there, is Hyamic languages of North Central Nigeria. I need to move something. Okay, fine. Now, the role of standardization of orthography for language documentation. Now, the context in which I'm going to be talking about is that for those of us who have studied language, Ethnologue records that Nigeria has a number of languages. And for instance, the count now is 524. Out of these 524, we have 515 that are living, 9 are extinct, unfortunately. Of the living languages, 505 are indigenous and 10 are non-indigenous. Now, what is more is 19 are institutional, and you can see it's a very small number. Well, 76 are developing. The large number, 299 vigorous, 18 are in trouble, and 82 rather, and then 39 are at various levels of endangerment. That can be sourced from Ethnologue website. Now, there is this awareness that every society's perspective is or philosophy is rooted in the language the people speak. Therefore, language is that heritage deserving safeguarding. Now, the area where the Hyamic language cluster is found. lies in the Nigerian middle belt in the Sahel zone in the north and tropical rainforest. This was research was done by Jhonnatan, a German scholar who had been studying in languages in this area from 1968. Now, to the north and of this belt, you have large ethnic groups such as Hausa and Yoruba. And, but the middle belt is characterized by an ethnic and linguistic diversity that, according to Greenback's very phenomenal research in 1956, is comparable to none in the world. And this is the case. If you travel in the area where these languages or these speech communities, and I'm going to explain why I use the word languages, are spoken, you'll be amazed that maybe after a kilometer or two, you actually will find yourself where another language, or maybe the same kind of language, but or the same language, but another variety of it is spoken. So for instance, where I live, within this radius of 4 kilometers, there are about 6 varieties. Incidentally, I understand all this because of the geography of where I was born. Now, Hyam, one of the varieties, which is contestably the oldest form of the language, is where we get the adjective Hyamic, and it is spoken by the Hyam people. The Hyam people are located where the famous Nok culture of Nigeria was found. Unfortunately, they are commonly referred to as Jaba, both in everyday life and in most literature. Now, this was how I got into the study of language. I actually did my first degree in literature, so I didn't have much to do with language, but just to be able to demystify what the name of my language, I venture into doing a discourse analysis study. So my doctoral research, John 2017, established that the term Java is disparaging and likens the Ham people to the stinking house mouse, and that is in Hausa. Bajre and Westerman is one of the most famous Hausa dictionaries ever produced and is available on the webpage I've provided. Accordingly, the Ham people and Hyam, the language, are all designations by which the people describe themselves and their language. Now, what is Hyamic languages in that case? So I say Hyamic language. The term Hyamic language or languages was coined by Blanche in a document that doesn't have a date, and he refers to interrelated varieties of speech communities that are located in the north central part of Nigeria. Early studies submit that the cluster comprises Hyam, Kwang, Sek, Shang, Yat, Jile, Kyoli, Shaman. That is according to Hansford 1976, Crozier and Blanche 1976, which was reproduced in 1992, and also in a recent study by Blanche in 2010. However, my research, being a native Hyam speaker, demonstrated that Zar is another variety that ought to be added to the list in respect of its similarity to Hyam, while Sek, which is the number 3 in the listing of the other scholars, should actually be left not to be a variety in a way, but to be classed as Hyam, which is number 1. Now, even though there is another variety called Igwara, and with an evidence that the Igwara people are Ham, but migration has caused their language to have a shift to the point that the Ham people do not understand them now, but the Igwara people can actually understand the Ham, or can actually understand him. But it is not in the class because of language shift. So it's, for me, it's another language of its own. Now, what is the problem? Given that the record of the talks delivered at FEL so far privileged that most minority languages survive merely through the spoken medium, and over time may disappear without a trace, the key problem for Hyam language clusters stems from a lack of standardized writing system. In addition to the pressure of the dominance of Hausa, which is the lingua franca in the north of Nigeria, as well as the absence of any formal teaching and learning in the language. I would say also that there is also a shift in terms of people moving to the city who fail to transfer their languages to the language to their children, and also intermarriages is affecting language transfer. Thus, this study does not merely highlight the implication of documenting the Hyamic language cluster of Nigeria, but it pays attention to the awareness that when a language dies, one vision of the world disappears. Now, historical evidence. Data from oral tradition shows that the people who make up the 9 varieties listed or 8 varieties listed as Hyamic regarded themselves as Ham until 1903, when the British colonial government mistakenly drew boundaries for administrative purposes without recourse to the history and linguistic affinities of the people of the area. And this was when British colonial rule was introduced in the region. That can be found in Mixe, Blanche, Hayab, and then John. And because people rely on oral tradition, over time, people actually feel that these demarcations that have been done by British colonial, was done by British colonial government, is the way life has always, or was the way life was before 1903. However, my research has proven that that is not the case, and other researchers. So the other challenge is that most of the speech communities are hardly recognized, but are subsumed under the major linguistic categories of Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba. Now, an average person who has had anything to do with Nigeria, once you're talking about language, people will tell you Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba. But Nigeria has over 500 languages. Unfortunately, this was the kind of classification that early scholars who came to Nigeria did. Now, linguistic evidence of affinity. We're not just making claims that these languages are together or these languages sound, they are similar. Rather, we have evidence, and the evidence is in linguistics. Now, for instance, the word bam in Hyam, which is supposed to be the oldest version of the language ever spoken, it's ba in Kyoli, it is bo in Kwang, it is ba in Shaman, bam in Shang, and bo in Zar, yat it is bo, jile it is ba. Now when you move to, and that means come, when you move to the Han, which is bok, you have bok, bok, kibok, kibok, bok, bok, bok. Now when you move to Har, which is house, you find hala, har, kiha, har, ha, ha, ha. When you move to the next, which is nom, God, it is nom, nom, num, nom, nom, nom. Now, once you move to the sun, incidentally, there is the same word for the sun and God in the language. Now, the question is that how should we write the language? So I did this work with Professor Gerhard Ludwig of the Asian African Institute of University of Hamburg, and we came to this conclusion that for us to write all these varieties of Hyam that I've listed, we need to organize the consonants of Hyam. Number one, we have to deal with the labials, palatals, the velars, the labiovelars, and the as it is here. So the next is how this is the table of the palatalized sounds. So you have the dentals, you have the alveolo, you have the palatals, you have the way they go. Now, it's happened that Hyam has some sounds that are not available in English. So when people started to write these languages, language or varieties of language, they have the varieties of Hyam. They had issues in presenting such words as the sound that is very close to nya, to nga. It is nya. It does not exist in English. And then let me take you backward. When you look at the sound, sorry, there is the h and the h. These sounds are also not available in English, and we have z, the affricate sound. Now, so what has happened so far? There has been Bible translation in the language. So in the year 2015, the Jesus film Jesu Wenom, as it is in the language, Jesus, Son of God, was published and televised in the Ham area. Now, next, in June 2016, Faunal Shafa, which will be translated as New Testament, but when you do a transliteration in our language, Faunal is Testament New. So it was also published in Hyam and is currently distributed in all the Hyamic-speaking communities. Now, there is also a word list published by the Hyam Language Bible Translation Group, or a number of word lists when there were trial versions and then the final version before the Bible, the New Testament was published. The question to ask now is that what have I done as a person who is advocating for the documentation of the language? One, in my doctoral dissertation, June 2017, I undertook the documentation and translation to the English language and the analysis of 66 traditional and modernized songs sung in 2 varieties of Hyam, utilizing the orthography of the Hyam Bible Translation and Literacy Project. This dissertation can be found here. Now, from 2017, after my graduation and return to Nigeria, I have published several children's stories through the Digital African Storybook Project, which is also available on this webpage. Now, my undergraduate students of language arts at Kaduna State College of Education from September 2016 to date have to undertake a mini project in their languages after a week of rigorous training on Nigerian orthography. Now, this is very curious to know that while we undertook degree in English, I graduated, I never knew that there was anything called the Nigerian orthography. So at that time, I was illiterate completely in my language. I could not read or write in it. Now, this is another attempt of work that I've done. I wrote this book while I was an Erasmus student at the University of Hamburg, and I called it The Basic Hyam Grammar. This book was edited. I was supported by Professor Yahat, and we came to terms to establishing the consonant sounds of this language, the vowel sounds, and the procedure for which it can be taught at the elementary school level. So for instance, we found a name in the language for a noun, which we call hawk, and then we also found a word for an adjective, which we call hawk, that is the friend of a name. Then, and verb, we call it kyom, which actually, or maybe to say what to do, kyom, something to do. We try to name this in the sense that an average child who speaks this language as a mother tongue will be able to comprehend and relate to the world. Recently, I have translated a portion of the Nigerian Constitution to Hyam. For instance, I translated I have rights, which could be the fundamental human rights. And this is I used one of the varieties of Hyam, which I also speak, and it is called Kweng, to write. And this was done in honor of the first indigenous person from Ham area who became a lawyer, who happens to speak this variety. So when you say I have rights in English, in the language, it will be mepoji. Now, I am a human being. I have fundamental human rights. Fundamental rights are stated in the Nigerian Constitution, 1999. It is translated in Hyam as Misunaton Kapoji or Menkan. Now, so the Constitution Nigeria, maybe we can say 1999, but because it's going to take a long sentence to say 1999 in Hyam. Now, I have the right to life, section 33. It is translated as Mepoji Hyomi Ngambul Sho Tad. And then I have the rights to dignity of person, and then it is also available in Hyam, as it were. Now, what are the challenges of this project, or to this project? Number one, reducing the Hyamic language cluster to writing comes with some challenges. So for instance, I negotiate for a middle ground using Hyam, which was engaged for social gatherings before the arrival of the Hausa to the area in the 1800s, and later the Europeans in 1903 forward. That is found in Williamson, 1971, and my work in 2016. Now, what I found out is that in the old days before our contact with the outside world, all these varieties, some of these varieties did not even exist. The varieties came as a result of people running away for their lives during the slave raids, which began in the 1800s in our own part, because we're in the hinterland of Nigeria. So when people moved, they still were able to reconnect with their people, with their society. And wherever they were and spoke a particular variety, they were still able to come back to speak Hyam, which is the variety which has given birth to the other varieties. Now, that is not the case because Hausa has replaced this language. So when people meet for convenience sake, they just speak in Hausa, and I'm working to discourage that. Now, aside lack of sufficient funding, some Ham people consider the project a political project instead of linguistic. But I focus only on the linguistic aspects. I'm not seeking for any political office, and no academic should be involved in politics of language. However, this is the case I submit. A unified orthography offers the prospects to document the greater part of the philosophy, geography, science, medicine, nature, and sociology of the Ham, which are fast disappearing. 2, it contributes to the restoration of the loss of the former indigenous identity of the Ham before colonial partitioning of the area, Mixe 1931, James 1997. For a caveat, the first time I was asked to present the findings of my research to the entire Ham community, a people, maybe because of lack of reliable census figures in Nigeria, we might put the population extrapolated at 800,000. And then when we met for the first time, they were shocked to see that somebody could actually give a formal speech in the language. I wrote the speech and I gave the formal speech in the language. And that was when I was able to remind those who were very old, 90s and in the hundreds, that before the coming of Hausa language to our location, whenever we met, we actually spoke in Hyam. And yes, I got the old, very old people to affirm that the claim I was making or the assertion was correct. Now, a unified orthography also enacts a collective identity for the Hyamic cluster. It erases the borderlines between we within the Ham people and them or they, shaped by geography, which has come as a result of what is happening today, and also offering the prospects to cross the barrier created by external interest. The argument is that if we engage Hyam to write the orthography at the moment, all other varieties will now utilize the orthography of Hyam to document their own varieties, as I have done with the Nigerian Constitution, or portion of the Nigerian Constitution, which I like to show you again. Now, this variety is not the variety of my family, it's not the one I speak. But because I am able to write in Hyam, I was able to utilize this variety to write the sense. So if I were to write in Hyam, the spellings might be different, but they will mean the same thing, but I'll utilize the same orthography. Now, again, documentation of Hyamic languages. I call them languages because as they stand today, people who speak these varieties, because of political reasons, tend to see themselves as different people. But whenever we introduce ourselves, everybody will say, Nom do Ham. May the Lord, may God support the Ham. Nobody has another name for their own ethnic group, but except for the language. So first we are Ham, but when it comes to languages, people feel that they have languages other than Hyam. So supporting language documentation does not only give a sense of belonging to the speakers and fosters national unity, but it elevates the status of the formally unwritten languages. Now, when unwritten languages become written, they could be easily saved for centuries, learned and taught in schools by a generation of speakers, thereby boosting national integration. Language documentation, to my mind, and I believe all of us who are in this conference would agree that it could provide a data bank for minority languages, bridging the gap created by the lack of intergeneration transfer, especially to the young born in cosmopolitan areas where English and Hausa are the principal languages of interaction. Now, let me share an experience that happened during my research. When I was conducting research, trying to find out where the name Java was from, and I couldn't find. I kept searching and I got into literature of 1800s. One was published by the French government. The research was done by Castellano, it was published in 1851. And in that book, there is a data in Hyam language of 288 words. And then in the Cole's famous Polyglotta Africana, there were 4 Hyam speakers who were in Sierra Leone in 1853 when Cole collected data. And through that book, we were able to recover the number 12 in our language, because with the coming of other cultures, the Ham people started calling 12 shock, but we started calling 10 shock, which is actually cope in the language, but shock in Hyam is 12, and that suggests that the people were duodecimal. So when you count from 1 to 12, you start again. And once it is many 12s, you just say shock, shock. Now that data was lost, but because of the written document, which was captured in the 1800s, we were able to recover that back home. Secondly, through that data that I found in the library at Stellenbosch in South Africa and also in Hamburg, we were able to discover that the Ham people didn't have lions in their territory. Rather, it was leopards. Now, so language documentation offers a lot in terms of saving a language and keeping it for generations to come. In conclusion, the paper establishes that the communal linguistic and linguistic affinities of the Hyamic cluster, Hyamic languages in the title, exemplifying how a unified orthography to document the speech communities could aid sustain the endangerment of Hyam. Secondly, the key goal of a unified orthography, to my mind, is founded on the historical, geographic, as well as their implicit ancestral link. I share this view of Blanche in his work that doesn't have a date of publication yet, a link which has been disrupted by the era of colonial demarcation, which exchanged relative groups were splitted into entities. There was an error in the typing. I apologize for that. Now, the study asserts that the documentation of Hyamic languages will not only save the language from loss, but could also elevate the language from the perceived low status, surviving only in the spoken form, to a written language, which is the ultimate goal of language documentation. The project is only sustainable, to my mind, when teaching and learning in schools is introduced. Now, since my return, I have tried to reach out to the local government to see if we could get them to support the teaching and learning of this language at the elementary level. But for want of political commitment, we are yet to achieve that at the moment. Mixe, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. John.
Yes.
Are there any questions from the audience? So while we're waiting for questions, may I ask a question myself?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
In your grammar, you describe the phonological system.
Yes.
Do you also have a description or plan to have a description of the syntax and the morphology?
Yes. Right now, this is a grand project which has exceeded what I did at that time. At the time I wrote Basic Hyam Grammar, I was actually undertaking my doctoral studies. So my energy was focused on writing out a dissertation. But while I was writing the data, I discovered that there were certain ideas about the language that I didn't know. For instance, how words were formed, and that is the morphology. So I also, then the phonology, I was able to discover, and in that grammar, so it's actually a sort of compendium. There is the phonology. For instance, I found out that in the language, plurality is not necessarily formed by adding another word. Tonality can actually exemplify plurality. For instance, when I say kyang in Hyam, I mean many farms. When I say kyang, kyang is one, kyang is plural. So, and the same thing with, if you say women, you say sheji is one, if you say sheji. So when the tone falls, naturally, if it is a countable noun, it is singular. When the tone goes up, if it's a countable noun, it is plural. And the same thing also occurs for the verbs. If a verb, when the sound is high tone, then it is a past tense. If it is low tone, it is a simple present tense. This was not something we knew before the year 2016 when I undertook that study. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
There is now a question in the audience as well. Manuel Bache, would you like to ask your question? Or shall I read out the question? So the question is, so we can talk more on clusters of endangered languages in this case, that an endangered language is such, like in Chinese culture as an example, isn't it?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So okay, now, when there are no scholars from within who are undertaking study, most of the expatriate scholars like Roger Blanche, he has done a lot. And I think I give credit to Roger Blanche much more, and also to Professor Yakat of the University of Hamburg. It was through reading. I was reading other things and I came across what they have been doing. Then I became curious. Now, we were speaking the language without knowing the levels of endangerment that the language is actually suffering. For instance, certain words have been replaced. Now, in Hyam, in those, if you meet, like this one now, thank you, that I've said, if you meet an average Hyam speaking person, he's likely to say to you, me gode. So the gode is a Hausa word. So we have kept the pronoun me, which is Hyam, but gode has been borrowed from Hausa and has been replaced. So because of this study that I did in order to understand from a native point of view the level of endangerment, I found that the language is actually replacing words, its own vocabulary, with other languages, not that it is borrowing what it does not have. So yeah, is one, I think that's one element of endangerment. And once the language is like that, you should begin to worry and do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another question from Hakim.
Yes.
Hakim, would you like to ask the question yourself, or shall I read it out? So the question is, how effective were the translated Bibles in enhancing the vitality of the endangered language? Are they taught to the community?
Fine. This is where the real matter is. Unfortunately, most of the people who do Bible translation, the Bible translation is done, and then the job of, or the task of teaching the language is left to the community. Now, as it is now, I'm one of the youngest persons, apart from my own students, who can read and write in the language. And I'm not young, I am 45. So it tells you that the language is actually is only spoken in the village, and then when you leave the village, even at the village level, the language is severely losing its vocabularies, being replaced by particularly Hausa language, which is a very dominant language. So yes, what we should have done was to bring this teaching and learning of the language to the community, which we couldn't do. But for me, the social media has helped me. I have the Facebook page, which I call Hyam Language and Identity. And then I have a WhatsApp group that is called Hyam Learning Zone. And other people have created their groups. As you can see, the shirt I am wearing is actually written in the language. So young people are printing these t-shirts to say, Nom do Ham, may God help the Ham. And then here is saying, I am a Ham youth. Now, this didn't happen before. So I am more or less like an academic who has to be an activist at the same time to try to raise the consciousness of the people to the idea of the level at which the language is endangered. And through the social media pages that I have, people ask questions. I think one thing I need to share with the group is that for now, if there are 100 kids that have been born in the Ham area from 2016 to today, whose parents have a telephone, I have given the name of 98, the spelling of the names of 98 out of that 100.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question, again from Manuel, who was surprised about the similarity, as he was under the impression that the more distant communities perhaps have more distant language. So can we speak about an existing or ancestral common language and branches to the Hyam?
Yes. What I think from my findings, unfortunately, because we were not sort of involved, that is, the people themselves were not involved in this study. Most of the researchers were coming from outside, and when they do the research, they go back, and one of the major research was in Deutsch, so it was inaccessible to us. Now, what I found when I started this research, collecting this data, I discovered that the languages were actually mutually intelligible, but all of us should know that a mutuality is not only that when it is intelligible, but when the mind is switched off, you wouldn't be able to get the mutuality of the language. So people often resort to using another third language in the thinking that these languages were not mutually intelligible. But when I came out with these research findings and I shared with them, showing evidence, every village I go to, I will speak in my own variety of Hyam, and I'll ask them to speak in their own variety. And at the end of the day, when we leave, they'll be surprised, oh, so this is how this is. Yeah, because we haven't paid attention, but now we're paying attention to it, yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Very comprehensive response. Thank you so much for your very interesting talk and for your amazing work for this language community. Can I please ask the last speaker of this panel, Zubair Torwali from Idara Baraye Taleem-o-Taraqi, who's going to speak about using children's native language repertoire to develop literacy materials. Early writing in Torwali. The floor is yours, Dr. Torwali.
Yes, it's in the papers. Have you seen it? It's in the Punch. I don't have my paper for you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your screen.
Yeah, thank you. My internet is a little bit unstable. If there is something happen, so I will notify that. Thank you very much. Thanks, FEL, for giving this opportunity of talking, even it is online and from distant. So I will be talking a little bit about the teaching materials we have developed for the Torwali MLE school, Torwali Multilingual Education School. And my presentation will be very short, and at the end, I will be happy to present a 5 minutes documentary in Urdu with English subtitle that will help the participants to understand about the MLE work we have been doing for the last 15 years. So this is about using the children native languages repertoire for developing literacy materials, for teaching materials for them. And it is mainly focused on the MTB MLE program in Torwali. We have started back in 2008. So Torwali language, I think it is now well known, a language of the Indo-Aryan family, which is spoken in Bahrain and the Chel valleys of the Swat Valley in northern Pakistan. The number of speakers is about 90 to 120,000 people, and close half of its population has already been migrated to the bigger cities of Pakistan like Karachi, Quetta, Hyderabad, Peshawar, Lahore. And this migration is still going on because of the low income status back in the Torwali highland. So people have to migrate for their livelihood to the cities. And the Torwali is one of the endangered minority languages spoken in northern Pakistan. In Pakistan, we have about 74 languages, of which more than 30 languages are endangered. So Torwali is one of the endangered languages, and which is surrounded by the dominant language Pashto, which is spoken by the northwestern province in our area. And also Urdu, the language of media, the language of education, and the language of common discourse in our context. So when when I was in my school days, and later on when I joined my college, you know that we had to continue our education in the educational institute, which are dominated by the Pashto speaking people. So they used to look down upon us, and we could not even speak our language before in their presence because of the shaming they used to do upon us. So it was back in 2004 or so, and I was very uncomfortable with this situation. But later on, when I came to know that there are some foreign scholars, linguists who had been working on my language, so I tried to reach out to them, and we started our work, our research on this language. So we did some preliminary research and planning with the help of those linguists from abroad. And later on, we developed in orthography a writing system for our language and wrote some course books for the MLE programs along with other programs. We have integrated Torwali education development program, but one of that program is one part is this MLE program. This Torwali is in education program. So the MLE school in Torwali was first established in 2008 by IBT, the institute for which I have been working in Bahrain. So the school was named as Moon School. Moon in Torwali means our school. In 2015, just a few years back, we changed the name to ILM, Innovative Learning Model School, because you know that people, to attract people for to send their children to these schools. And these schools are primarily preschool, grade school, they kindergarten 1 and kindergarten 2. But when in one class we have class 1 and class 2 also, and class we now started class 3 as well. So this is the background of the MLE program in Torwali. We have started in 2008 after doing some basic research, some developing the orthography, developing the writing system, and developing the course books for the Torwali children. So the curriculum we developed for this school is around 2 areas, main areas: literacy subjects and non-literacy subjects. So under the literacy subjects, we have Torwali alphabet book, Torwali primer, Torwali reading and writing primers, graded reading stories, graded listening stories, big books of the reading stories. And non-literacy subjects, we have basic arithmetics, cultural studies, ethics and Islamic studies in our context, because all the Torwali community is Muslim, Sunni Muslim, counting books, and then Torwali rhymes. So we developed the orthography in the line, along the line, the script of the Perso-Arabic script, because our people were familiar with that this script. They use it while reading Quranic, the Holy Book Quran, and it was also used by Urdu, so the national language of Pakistan. So keeping all this political, social, and religious environment, we decided to have for Torwali on the as the Urdu language has. But in the Torwali language, obviously we have some special characters which are not used in Urdu or in Pashto, which are highlighted here in red in this Torwali alif bete, this picture. So these are some of the subjects we have been using in the MLE program: literacy subject and non-literacy subjects. Literacy subject, you know that it is primer. Well, I think primer alphabet book and the reading and writing, listening stories. We will be talking about that later on. But the non-literacy subjects, which include, you know, this is we have developed for the cultural studies. We have developed a lesson plan, which we often call a tonga wheel. A tonga wheel. It's a circle-like thing. In the center of the circle, there is one theme for 1 week, and around the circle, the nearer circle, there are 6 themes, and then there are other themes. So each story, each theme connected to the central theme for 1 week. All the reading stories are connected to the culture, the non-literacy subject, which is mathematics, cultural studies, ethics, and counting books, and Torwali rhymes. So this is a lesson plan which is based on weekly teaching, and a week is in our school a week is of 5 days. So in the literacy subjects, the primer and the literacy subject, we have 2-track system. One is story track and the other one is primer track. So story track is mainly focused on comprehension and meaning. It involves reading and listening to stories. A 1-hour session is given daily in the story track. The teaching activities are children listening to and then reading stories from the Torwali culture. So the reading stories we have developed are 32 listening stories and 64 reading stories for 1 year. So these are all developed by the Torwali community in different workshops, and they are very relevant to their culture. So this is 1-hour activity going on every day, and focus and is focused on the meaning of the meaning and concept making of the pedagogy. While the primer track is mainly focused on accuracy and correctness, how to write and how to spell and how to break words and how to join words, uses materials that include an alphabet. So this track has the course books as alphabet book, primer, reading and writing primers. In the alphabet book, words in which the letter is used with word initially, word medially, and word finally. So we have each word has a relevant picture beside it, and each letter, each letter, the alphabet, has a relevant picture in front of it, and there are 3 words written on each page. The letter is used, and these words as word initially, then word medially, and then word finally, and every word is supported by a picture from the culture. So and we have developed this. We did some survey which letters come first and how frequent a letter is. So based on that, we developed that primer book, an alphabet book. It is not necessarily in the order which Alif Bet Te say, but we used another method, another system which is based on the frequency of each letter. And the story track, it is as I told, it is a thematic approach. It does not bother about the correctness or accuracy of the terms. Each week of each term has one theme chosen from the student's culture, as I told in the weekly lesson plan, as the circle the picture shows here. Lessons for each for the theme are categorized as science, arts, socialization, health, play, games, and rhymes. So there are 6 lessons in each 6 themes in every week, and around each week there is 1 lesson per day. Both the listening and reading stories are on the same theme for the week, and each week has 1 listening story and 2 reading stories. So how we teach to the students? So we teach 1 listening stories and 2 reading stories per week, and there are 32 weeks in our academic year, which are divided into 4 terms, 8 weeks per term, 2 months per term. The goal of the listening stories, which are longer than the reading stories, is comprehension. For instance, the teacher has to read out the story to the students, while the students listen to the stories, and at the end, the teacher has to ask some questions about the context, about the contents of the story, and the students have to answer. So this is basically teaching meanings and concept to the students. While the reading stories is an activity where what the children listen to, then they relate those sounds to some representation, symbolic representation, letters, syllables, and words. Each reading story is supported with a big book. Big book is similar to that reading story, but a 5-size page, so people, students could see easily the picture and the text. The primer track, each lesson in the primer track is based on the teaching of two letters per day. Even there are days which has one letter. The syllables and words they are used and their usage in sentences. So we go from letter to syllables, then words to sentences, and then to paragraph. So a graded writing and reading system here. The sequence of teaching is from letter to say, okay. Each daily primer lesson is 1 hour. It is also 1 hour lesson per day, distributed into 4 different activities of 15 minutes each. Activity, different activities. The teachers are provided with teacher's guide in Torwali, also in Urdu. There are boxes which we call breaking and building boxes, word building and word breaking boxes, as we see in this lesson plan. Sample on the right, in the picture on the right, tonal. So you can see the breaking and building of the words into letters, and then letter into words. The practice of teaching writing in the primer track seems conventional. It's very traditional, as we see, but it is according to the discourse model, skills discourse model developed by Rose Ivonich, which has developed different 4 discourse, skill discourse. So this primer is based on that model of developed by this guy, and it is very useful, as we have seen that the primer track, the skill discourse writing is mostly focused on correctness of the letter, word, sentence, and text formation, rather than in meaning or comprehension. So this is the primer track. Apart from this, the primer track, we have the counting books, or the basic mathematical concepts which are also taught in Torwali from the very basic, from the first grade to up to grade 3rd, as we have in these 3 established schools we have. And as I told you, we have to teach ethics. I mean, Islamic teachings. We have to teach general cultural studies, where the students are led to see things, how their culture works, and how they see different cultural activities around them, and even at their homes. So this was I would now conclude this was only focused on the teaching materials we have developed and we have been using for the Torwali program. And if we look at the various models of language, saving languages, or language maintenance, so this model can be described as the language maintenance program, but it has an early exit program. Because of lack of resources, we could not continue the schools up to grade 5th, even though at one campus is out of 3 campuses of the Torwali school system. We are now at grade 3rd and grade 2 and grade 3rd as well. but we see that the better model of mother tongue based multilingual education programs around the world are based where the mother tongue is taught up to grade 8 or 5th, and we are now striving to have to extend and to upgrade our program to that as well. So this was a short introduction of our Emily Torwali Emily program. So here is a documentary. If I can play it, a short documentary with you can see the country where we are living. So you can and there are English subtitle as well. Let me try if it works.
Yeah, the sound, there's a funny way, this is Rita, hi, sorry. The sound won't work because you need to, when you start sharing, allow it to access computer sound. So that's why it's not going to work like this. So you could put the link in the chat, or you could stop sharing and allow it in the settings again. This will take a while, but
so I'm putting the link in the chat, and so that you can play it from there, right?
Yeah, that's one option, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So in the meantime, if there are any questions from the audience, please put them in the chat and then we can call on you. So Hakim has a question. Would you like to ask your question, Hakim, or shall I read it out?
Yes, you can read it.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
So northern areas of Pakistan is a home to many endangered languages. I wonder, says Hakim, if there are such initiatives in other parts of the region for other languages, and if you collaborate with them to preserve endangered languages. Thank you.
Yeah, there are, Forum for Language Initiatives, which is an umbrella organization based in Islamabad, and which is actually a training and resource institute for the language scholars of this region. So they train people, they educate for the language rights, and they also publish some books in these languages. So we are very well partnered with that organization, as well as we have other community organization based in North Pakistan, in Gilgit-Baltistan, in Chitral, in Indus-Kohistan, in our Swat region, as well as in the other parts in Dir Kohistan as well. So this is a collaborative work, and we have been doing for the last 2 decades. And obviously, there are organizations working on these languages.
Thank you. There is a question also by Abdallah Buzandag on the. Would you like to ask your question? Please.
Hi, Zubair. Thank you for this conference. I have a question about the script. Does Torwali have its own script, or were there a heated discussion about how to choose the script for the language, like what happened in other countries? In my country, there was a heated discussion, political discussion about which script can we choose, Arabic script or Latin, or the script of the language is its script.
Yeah, you're right. You know that Torwali is one of the Dardic languages. So the Dardistan area used to be in the ancient world. It used to be the northern parts of Pakistan, Kashmir and India, also the eastern Afghanistan. So this entire region was once called Dardistan, and the Dardic people used to live here, but they were invaded by the Buddhism, and then again by the Turkic people, then the Pashtun people. So they lost their original script, which could be Kharosthi or Gandhari. You might be familiar with these two things, two type of writing, which we find in the rock inscriptions in this area. That might be some of the basic script of the Dardic languages, but there are Dardic language you might have split into many languages, and we lost our script. And so when we were developing the orthography, so this question was before us, what type of script we need to choose. So it is a very political, very religious issue in our context. You know that Punjabi is divided by script, even Hindustani is divided by script into Hindi and Urdu, and Punjabi is divided by in the eastern and western Punjab by Gurmukhi and by the Perso-Arabic. So we need to look at some factors which are around us, acceptability, learnability, and people accessibility, and people former familiarity. So our Torwali people were familiar with this type of script before, because if they all were illiterate, but they had to read Quran, the holy book of Islam. So that is in Arabic script. So that's why, given all these circumstances, we decided to develop to have our script on the basis of Arabic script. Otherwise, we know that there are many challenges in adopting this script in the technological thing. You know that technology doesn't support this script as much as it can support other scripts, but we had to adopt it because of the political and religious and other social issues.
Thank you.
Can I ask another question? Or the other question is about minorities in Bahrain. Are there other minorities like Torwali in Bahrain, or just?
Yeah, and Swat is very well known because of its natural beauty and because of some recent extremist militant insurgency in the area. It is now well known, and people often call it as the Switzerland of Pakistan because of its natural beauty. But it is also culturally diverse, and there are 5 languages other than Pashto are spoken in the Swat Valley as well. So we have our sister language near which borders Torwali is Gauri. That is our sister language. So there is another language which is Ushuju.
Are there programs for teaching these languages, or just?
No, in Gauri there is a program similar to Torwali. And some other parts of northern Pakistan, there are similar programs as we have.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think there's time for one last question by Christina Ringo. Would you like to ask a question, Christina?
Sure, thank you. I was trying to sort of understand what the different presentations had together, because I had in common, because I'm not an expert myself in teaching languages. So one of the things that I understood that some of the authors had in common, that interaction between the learners is important. So is that somehow included in the presentation in your work as well?
Yeah, you mean interaction between the learners, huh? Interaction between the students or the entire community?
I'm primarily mean the learners, but in the community is interesting, of course, as well.
Yeah. You know that we are fortunate enough that our people still speak their language, even though they can't, majority of them can't write it. And in the classroom, you know that in our school classroom, the learners, when they interact with each other, so the language is Torwali. Even in the public sector schools, there is no Torwali taught are included in the course book. So the students have to speak Torwali with each other as well as with their teachers. And this often creates problem for the teachers and the public sector schools, because if the teachers are from the dominant Pashto community, so they can't understand the children, what the children speak, because they can't understand the Torwali, they can't speak it. And same problem is faced by the children of these schools, because they can't communicate what they have to say with their teachers. And as when I was a kid at the school, so I had to leave the school because of this shaming and stigma, as I could not speak Pashto well, and the teachers would laugh at me, and they didn't regard my language at all. They regarded something a humbug or nonsense. So that's why I had to leave the school for 2 months, but my father was kind enough, and he brought me back to that school.
Okay, thank you. We have to finish this session now. Thank you to all our speakers and for the audience for their lovely questions. I'm going to hand over to Lily Khan, who is going to chair the next session.